should you be going out to get a loan in the first place? There are a lot of factors that come into play right now. It might well be the largest financial decision that you take in your life. Nisreen Mamaji, CFP and founder of MoneyWorks, is joining me on this leg of the conversation. Nisreen, thanks so much for taking the time. And just for context, we've already spoken about the prevailing rates for home loans, etc., and what the best way of prepaying a loan is. But the question is, should you take that loan in the first place? What should you bear in mind before you sign that check? What, in your opinion, should be the time frame? And a lot of people, let me also ask this, right? A lot of people used their investment savings and they tend to wipe it all out. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, so thank you for having me on the show, Alex. And, that's a very relevant question today and something that we are asked on a daily basis. So typically, you have to figure out what is the optimum amount of your portfolio that you're willing to use for your down payment. And, is wiping out your savings even worth it? Or it will add to, further stress and, derailing of your entire investment planning. So typically, first thing that you should be looking out for is keeping an emergency fund between 3 to 9 months of your expenses, depending on the kind of job that you have, where you live, and who your dependents are. So you figure out that and keep between 3 to 9 months, of course, depending on how your job is going. Also, try to put the down payment with your own savings, and maybe part of it can be even a loan to you, because you shouldn't be liquidating your long-term assets, because that can obviously hurt your future goals. And very important is your long-term buckets, which is your retirement investments, your long-term equity funds, your PPF, EPF. Try not to dip into those. Now, what is the amount of down payment compared to your portfolio that is ideal for you? If you're a single income household, you should be looking at between 25 to 30% of your portfolio, which you could be using for your down payment. If you're dual income and both of you have stable jobs, then you can go as high as even 40%. But if you are in a business setup or a freelancer where your income is variable, then try to stay around 20 to 25%, because more than that would definitely hurt your portfolio, as well as you won't be able to cope even with the EMI structure going down the road.
Yeah, it's an important point that you're raising.
Yeah.
And invariably, we're talking about, let's put some numbers to it, right? So you're talking about a house, an average house in Mumbai or an average house in Bengaluru, then you're talking about upwards of 1.5 to 2 crore at the very minimum. In Mumbai, at least 2 crore is at the very minimum. So you're talking about if a bare minimum of 20%. So what, in your opinion, is the ideal down payment? Because if you're only doing 20%, then you're talking about a 1.6 crore loan, and that needs to be sanctioned in the first place.
So, there's something called a rental yield. So that's something that you should be looking at first and foremost. Now, what this means is, the annual rent divided by the property value and multiplied by 100. I mean, mathematically, that's how it works. Now, typically, in most Indian metros, the rental yield is around, say, 2 to 3%. Your home loan interest rates are in the area of, say, 8 to 9%, and your equity returns over the longer period is, say, 10 to 12%. So if you are going to take rent out your home, so you would be paying, say, about 35,000 for a 1.5 crore property. 35,000 per month translates to about 4.2 lakhs a year. So here your rent that you're paying is about in the range of 2.8%. Now, if you compare that with, the EMI that you would be paying, you are saving about 85,000 rupees per month, okay? Because your EMI would be, say, about 1.15 lakhs a month for a 1.5 crore loan. So immediately that amount, which is your 85,000 rupees, which is the difference, should be put into a good SIP, which can yield you, say, between 10 to 12%, so that after, say, 30 years or even a longer period of time, you will have a good amount of corpus, and you can use that, for the down payment of the house, or you can pay that for, if you've already purchased it, then you can prepay it, etc., etc. So these are the percentages that will really work for you, because 2.3, 2 to 3% is, say, your rental yield. 8 to 9% is what you're paying for your EMI, and your equity in SIPs could yield you about 10 to 12%. So play on those figures and try to maximize that difference between the rent and the EMI that you would potentially pay in order for you to, maximize your savings and get the most out of, renting your property for the shorter period of time.
So the
And
argument
also
that
you would have tax advantages, because you can claim your HRA also.
Yeah, claim HRA, all right. Not in the new tax regime. In the old tax regime, it's available.
Exactly.
But
in the old one.
But having said that, Nisreen, the argument that a lot of people make, and I've heard this often, is that rent is an expense that I will not get back, which is why I'm paying towards a house that I own. Is that a wrong argument to make, in your opinion?
So, it's a good idea if you're in it for the longer term, the tenure is higher, you have a backup financial plan, and the location is, of course, very desirable, something that you can't give up. Because a very high down payment and a lower loan, that could also work for you, depending on the situation that you are in. And if you bought the flat at a, significant discount. So also, I mean, you have to consider whether it is inherited. You might have an inheritance amount or an inherited property. So I'll just break it down for you, in terms of the advantages and disadvantages. Now, advantage obviously is that, you're accumulating an asset. So if you take a loan, then your tenant is paying off your debt and you can build equity in that asset over the longer period of time. It's an inflation hedge because real estate values, can go up in the longer term, and EMI might remain the same, if you've taken the fixed one. And you have tax benefits in terms of maybe your EMI interest, your property taxes, your maintenance costs. These are also tax deductible. But what your disadvantages could be is that it could be a negative cash flow also. For example, if, in many markets, what happens is the rent is not covering the EMI. So then in that case, you will be going out of pocket for your maintenance, probably even your, taxes, the insurance. Now, if it's 2 to 3% that you're earning and you're paying a home loan interest rate of 8 to 9%, then you're definitely out of pocket. Then, your upfront costs are very high. So you have a substantial down payment, you have 20% more or more. So you'll have to figure out that corpus is available to you either in form of your savings or you're withdrawing from your long-term, funding plans. Then real estate is not very easily converted to cash, so it's illiquid in that sense. If there's an emergency, then you can't sell, 100 square feet in order to, get that amount that you require. Also, sometimes the property could be vacant, if it's not the one that you're living in and you're depending on the tenant, the rental income to meet your EMI. What about the months that you don't have a tenant? Then, you will have to pay for that EMI. Then there's repairs, there's brokerage costs, then there's tax on the rental income that you earn also. I mean, if the difference is more, then you are paying on the extra amount. So when you consider all these factors, you'll have to make sure that the entire, option is working for you mathematically, in the sense that, are you going to pay the down payment now and the balance, through EMIs, or you are going to just stay on rent and invest the balance amount until your down payment is of a higher level and your rent and your EMI is lower. So I think it's also very advisable to go for a higher down payment and lower rent.
That's an important
lower
point.
EMI.
Right. It's an important point. But see, a lot of people have this thought that they're going to buy a property and put it on rent and use the rent to pay the EMI. But the way that you're describing it, the maths just does not add up. And you've explained why that is, because rental yields are what, 2.5% to 3%, and that's in your big markets. In your smaller markets, it might even be lower than that. Is that the case?
Right. Absolutely. That's definitely the case. So if your rental yield is so low, then it really doesn't make sense. So I would think that it's better for you to just rent the property, because if you're getting a 1.5 crore property, say at 35,000 rupee, rent, and as I mentioned earlier, the balance is saved in the SIP, then you're that much faster in getting into a sort of earning a higher down payment. So then you only have to worry about, say, 10 to 20% that you're going to take the loan for. So I think that's a better way of looking at it, depending on which city you're staying in and what the figures are in your particular geographical area. But save for your, down payment. Make the down payment higher and take the loan for the smaller amount.
Okay.
Now, your next question could be, how do I save?
No, it's actually specifically, how do you ring fence that amount, right? Because you have multiple things that you're saving for in the long term. And particularly life after retirement, right? That's a major saving. People are saving for 25 and 30 years beyond retirement now. And so from that perspective, how do you ensure that what you're setting aside for your house is for your house? And is it that, I know a few daredevils out there will say, look, I can live on rent for the rest of my life, but a lot of people will say, look, eventually I need to have my own house.
Absolutely. No, I think most people want to do that. So for that, you have to create the plan. Now, what ring fencing actually means is you're assigning money to a goal and you're investing it according to the timeline. So what you need to do is have a separate fund, for your down payment for the property. It's very important to mix up everything together. Otherwise, you just have one pool, say like an asset creation or a wealth creation pool, and you're dipping into that for your short-term goals, your mid-term goals, and even your long-term goals. So very importantly, have separate funds, do your appropriate asset allocation, and also automate the whole thing. So you don't have to keep on worrying about it or, going through any kind of mental agony. This also leads to discipline, honestly speaking. So what you do is that every rupee should be assigned, to maybe an emergency fund, to the home purchase, to the children's planning, to your own retirement, and also your lifestyle needs, which will be also, you have to plan for that as well. So each goal will have, say, a different timeline, obviously. So if it's a lifestyle goal, it's a holiday that you're planning, it could be, say, 2 years. If it's a home purchase down payment, it could be between 3 to 5 years. If it's your child or your retirement, it could be anything from 7 to 25 years. So if you have put a timeline to the goal and a separate fund assigned to each goal, you won't get, mixed up in your planning itself. Now, at least have different folios, if not different funds, so that mentally you know how you have allocated yourself. And don't keep a common equity fund, because sometimes people do, they just have one fund and then they're dipping into this and they get very tempted to withdraw at the wrong time. So match your asset allocation. Suppose you're investing for, say, 2 years. Then you keep your money in, say, liquid, short-term, arbitrage kind of a strategy. If it's between 3 to 4 years, maybe an aggressive hybrid, a balanced advantage fund could work. If it's between 5 to 7 years, a 100% equity fund. And if it's more than 7 years, then you can look at certain themes and a combination of a thematic fund or an equity fund. And very importantly, automate all this through SIPs so that, you don't get confused and you don't get tempted to withdraw.
Yeah, and particularly if you've gained long-term capital gains and you intend to utilize that to buy a house, you can utilize the proceeds and you put it in a capital gains account so that you don't pay capital gains tax on it. But Nisreen, absolute pleasure speaking with you as always. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Alex. Thank you.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Your Money Matters. Tell us whether you're thinking of buying a house and whether these conversations helped you make up your mind. And do stay tuned. This is NDTV Profit.